You've been lied to about capitalism and socialism, not by conspiracy, but by something worse, oversimplification. Everyone's got an opinion. Capitalism is freedom, or capitalism is exploitation. Socialism is compassion, or socialism is tyranny. But here's what nobody's telling you. The entire debate is rigged. It's a false choice designed to keep you arguing while missing the real issue, power, and who gets to control your life. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you why both systems share the same fatal flaw, what actually drives human behavior regardless of ideology, and most importantly, how this debate reveals something crucial about how you're living your own life right now. This isn't about defending either side. It's about seeing clearly, thinking for yourself, and understanding the forces that shape society and your choices within it. Nietzsche, Marx, Adam Smith, Schopenhauer, they all saw pieces of this puzzle, and when you put them together, the picture gets uncomfortable. But uncomfortable truths are better than comfortable illusions. If this kind of honest, philosophical deep dive resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe to support the channel. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who are tired of shallow talking points and actually want to think. Now, let's tear down some illusions.
The false binary. Why this debate misses the real point.
You know what's fascinating? We've been arguing about capitalism versus socialism for over a century now, and most people still treat it like picking a sports team. You're either team red or team blue, right? But here's the thing. The moment you buy into that framework, you've already lost the plot. It's like arguing whether you should breathe with your left lung or your right lung. The question itself reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how systems actually work in the real world. Every successful economy on the planet is a hybrid, a messy compromise between individual freedom and collective responsibility. Pure capitalism and pure socialism are philosophical fantasies that exist nowhere except in textbooks and the minds of ideologues who've never run so much as a lemonade stand. The real issue isn't which system is better. It's understanding what each system optimizes for and what it sacrifices. Capitalism excels at generating wealth and innovation through competition and individual incentives. It's messy, it's unequal, but damn, it works when it comes to producing abundance. Socialism, on the other hand, attempts to address the moral problems that capitalism creates: the inequality, the exploitation, the fact that some people get crushed by the wheels of economic progress. But here's where it gets interesting. Both systems share the same fatal flaw. They both concentrate power. In capitalism, power flows to those who control capital. In socialism, power flows to those who control the state. Different mechanisms, same underlying structure of dominance and control. What we're really dealing with here are power structures dressed up in economic philosophy. Foucault understood this better than most. He saw that every system, regardless of its stated ideology, creates mechanisms of control and surveillance. The capitalist boss watching your productivity metrics and the socialist bureaucrat monitoring your compliance with the 5-year plan are playing the same game with different uniforms. The language changes, the aesthetics shift, but the fundamental relationship between those who have power and those who don't remains remarkably consistent. And this is where most people get trapped. They think they're debating economic systems when they're actually just choosing which flavor of hierarchy they prefer. The deeper truth is that both capitalism and socialism are attempting to solve the same fundamental problem. How do you organize millions of strangers to cooperate without killing each other? How do you distribute resources, assign work, and create meaning in a complex society? These aren't economic questions, they're philosophical ones. And like most philosophical questions, they don't have clean answers. What works in a village of 150 people doesn't scale to a nation of 150 million. The complexity itself creates problems that neither system was designed to handle. But instead of acknowledging this complexity, we keep retreating to our ideological corners, defending abstractions while the actual world operates in the messy middle ground where real people make real compromises every single day.
Human nature versus ideological fantasy.
Let's talk about something that makes ideologues on both sides deeply uncomfortable. Human nature actually exists. I know. Some people want to pretend we're blank slates who can be molded into whatever the system requires. But Schopenhauer nailed it when he talked about the fundamental will that drives all living things. We're not neutral computers waiting to be programmed. We come with factory settings, and those settings include some pretty inconvenient truths. We're tribal. We're status conscious. We care more about our own kids than other people's kids. We're lazy when we can get away with it and ambitious when we see an opportunity. We're cooperative within our groups and competitive between them. Any economic system that ignores these realities isn't creating a new society. It's building a house on sand. Hobbes understood what many modern thinkers conveniently forget. In the state of nature, life is brutish and short because humans compete for scarce resources. That competition doesn't disappear just because you change the economic system. Capitalism acknowledges this competitive nature and attempts to channel it productively through markets and property rights. It says, yeah, you're selfish, so let's create a system where your selfish pursuits accidentally benefit others. Adam Smith's invisible hand isn't about everyone being nice. It's about harnessing selfishness for collective benefit. The baker doesn't make bread because he loves you. He makes it because he wants your money. And somehow, magically, you get fresh bread and he gets to pay his bills. It's not elegant, but it works with human nature rather than against it. But here's where capitalism's critics have a legitimate point, and Marx saw it clearly. When you reduce everything to market transactions, you create a different kind of problem. You get alienation. You get people treating each other as instruments rather than ends in themselves. You get a society where everything has a price and nothing has inherent value. The worker becomes a cog in a machine, valued only for productive output. And this isn't some abstract philosophical complaint. It's a genuine human cost. People feel it in their bones when they're treated as resources rather than as human beings. The capitalist system might work with certain aspects of human nature, but it also violates other equally important aspects: our need for meaning, for community, for recognition as something more than economic units. Socialism attempts to correct this by emphasizing collective ownership and shared responsibility. It says we can transcend our selfish nature through proper social organization. And you know what? In small groups, this actually works. Families operate on socialist principles, from each according to ability to each according to need. You don't charge your kid rent or make them pay for dinner. But here's the problem. Those instincts evolved for groups of maybe 150 people, not nations of millions. When you try to scale familial love to encompass strangers you'll never meet, something breaks down. The incentive structures get weird. Why work hard if you get the same regardless? Why innovate if there's no personal reward? The system fights against the very nature it's trying to overcome, and usually, nature wins. Not because socialism is morally wrong, but because it's asking humans to consistently act against their deepest programming.
The incentive problem. What actually drives people?
Here's a question that'll make you uncomfortable. What really motivates you to get out of bed and do something difficult? Be honest. Is it pure altruism and love for humanity? Or is it some combination of self-interest, recognition, fear of failure, and the desire to prove something to yourself and others? Nietzsche understood that human beings are driven by will to power, not necessarily power over others, but the drive to overcome resistance, to achieve, to become something more than we currently are. This isn't good or bad. It's just what we are. And any economic system that fails to account for this drive is going to run into serious problems. The incentive structures you create determine the behaviors you get, and pretending otherwise is just wishful thinking dressed up as social theory. Adam Smith built an entire economic philosophy around a simple observation. People respond to incentives. When you can keep the fruits of your labor, you work harder. When you can profit from innovation, you innovate more. When competition rewards efficiency, you become more efficient. The invisible hand isn't magic. It's just the predictable result of millions of people pursuing their own interests within a framework of property rights and voluntary exchange. Now, you can argue this is morally ugly, that we should be better than this, and maybe you're right. But the question isn't what we should be, it's what we actually are. And what we actually are is creatures who respond powerfully to personal incentives. Capitalism doesn't create this tendency. It just acknowledges it and builds a system around it. But here's where it gets complicated, because Hayek added another crucial insight. Knowledge is dispersed. No central planner, no matter how intelligent or well-intentioned, can possibly know what millions of individuals know about their local circumstances, preferences, and opportunities. The price system in a free market is actually an information processing mechanism. It aggregates all that dispersed knowledge into signals that coordinate economic activity without anyone being in charge. When bread gets scarce, prices rise, bakers produce more, and the problem solves itself. No committee needed, no 5-year plan. Just people responding to incentives based on local knowledge. It's messy and imperfect, but it handles complexity that centralized systems can't even comprehend. Socialism's incentive problem is more subtle but ultimately fatal. When you disconnect effort from reward, you create what economists politely call free rider problems, and what the rest of us call, why should I bust my ass when lazy Bob gets the same as me? In theory, everyone works for the collective good. In practice, everyone's waiting for everyone else to do the heavy lifting. You can try to solve this with surveillance, quotas, and punishment for underperformance. But now you're not building a worker's paradise. You're building a prison with extra steps. The system requires either impossible levels of selflessness or brutal enforcement mechanisms. Usually you get the enforcement mechanisms. The road to serfdom, as Hayek called it, is paved with good intentions and backed up by state power making sure you fulfill your obligations to the collective, whether you feel like it or not.
Power corrupts everything, the hidden constant.
Let's cut through the ideological fog and talk about the one thing both systems have in common: concentrated power and the people who wield it. Machiavelli wasn't cynical. He was realistic. He understood that power doesn't care about your ideology. It only cares about preserving and expanding itself. Give someone power over others and watch what happens. Doesn't matter if they call themselves a CEO or a party secretary, a Wall Street banker, or a central planning committee member. The mechanisms might differ, but the result is remarkably similar. Those with power use it to benefit themselves and those close to them, while creating elaborate justifications for why this arrangement is actually good for everyone else. It's almost beautiful in its consistency. Under capitalism, power concentrates in the hands of those who control capital. They own the factories, the land, the resources, the platforms. And with that ownership comes enormous influence over workers, communities, and even governments. The capitalist can move factories overseas, can lobby for favorable regulations, can use wealth to shape the political system to preserve their advantages. Sure, there's competition, but competition tends to produce winners, and winners tend to use their winnings to rig the game further in their favor. What started as a meritocracy becomes an oligarchy, where the children of the successful inherit not just wealth, but access, connections, and opportunities that others will never see. The system doesn't stay neutral. It tilts toward those who've already won. Under socialism, power concentrates in the hands of those who control the state. And here's the cruel irony. You've replaced many competing power centers with one massive, inescapable one. At least under capitalism, you can theoretically quit your job and work for a competitor. Under state socialism, there's only one employer, the government. Displease them, and you don't just lose your job, you lose everything. Foucault saw this clearly. When economic power and political power merge into a single entity, the mechanisms of control become total. Every aspect of life becomes political. Your work, your housing, your access to goods, all depend on staying in good standing with the bureaucratic apparatus. The state doesn't wither away, as Marx promised. It metastasizes into an all-encompassing structure that monitors, directs, and controls. Orwell and Huxley gave us two visions of totalitarian control. And here's the thing. Both were right. Orwell showed us the boot stamping on a human face forever. The brutal, obvious oppression of state power crushing dissent. Huxley showed us something more subtle. A population controlled through pleasure, distraction, and the illusion of freedom. Modern systems, whether capitalist or socialist, tend toward both. The state monitors your communications, tracks your movements, and has the legal authority to detain you. Meanwhile, corporations harvest your data, manipulate your behavior through psychological tricks, and keep you pacified with endless entertainment. Different flavors of control, same loss of genuine autonomy. The real question isn't capitalism versus socialism. It's how do we prevent any system from accumulating so much power that individuals become helpless before it?
Historical reality check. What the evidence actually shows.
All right, let's talk about what actually happened when these systems met reality, because history doesn't care about our theories. The 20th century was essentially a massive, tragic experiment in economic systems, and we've got the data. It's not pretty for either side, but it's especially brutal for one of them. Every major attempt to implement full socialism, Soviet Union, Maoist China, Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, resulted in economic stagnation, political repression, and in several cases, mass death through famine and political purges. We're not talking about theoretical problems here. We're talking about tens of millions of actual human beings who died because centralized planning turns out to be catastrophically bad at the simple task of feeding people. Hayek predicted this, and he was right. When you eliminate price signals and try to coordinate economic activity through central planning, you lose the information processing capability of markets. The result isn't just inefficiency, it's chaos masked by authoritarian order. Soviet breadlines weren't just inconvenient, They were a symbol of a system that couldn't perform the basic functions of an economy. Meanwhile, the nomenklatura, the party elite, lived in luxury while preaching equality. The workers' paradise turned out to be hell for the workers and paradise for the bureaucrats, every single time. You can argue those weren't real socialism, but at some point, you've got to ask, if every attempt to implement your system ends in disaster, maybe the problem is the system, not the execution. But before the capitalists start celebrating, let's talk about your track record too. Unregulated capitalism gave us child labor, company towns where workers were essentially serfs, environmental devastation, boom and bust cycles that destroyed lives, and inequality so extreme it threatened social stability. The Gilded Age wasn't gilded for the people working 16-hour days in dangerous factories. Tocqueville warned about this. He saw how democracy and capitalism could create a new form of tyranny, where masses of people are technically free but practically powerless. Modern capitalism has addressed some of these problems through regulation, labor laws, and social safety nets. But notice what that means. Capitalism works best when it's modified by socialist policies. Pure capitalism is as dangerous as pure socialism, just in different ways. What the evidence actually shows is that mixed systems work best. Market economies with strong social safety nets, property rights combined with regulations to prevent abuse, competition balanced with cooperation. Scandinavia isn't socialist despite what American politicians claim. It's capitalist with generous welfare states funded by market economies. Singapore is authoritarian but economically free. China is politically communist but economically capitalist. The successful societies are the ones that abandoned ideological purity and embraced pragmatic combinations of what works. Mill's utilitarianism applies here. The best system is the one that produces the best outcomes for the most people, regardless of ideological elegance. And the outcomes clearly favor mixed economies that balance individual freedom with collective responsibility.
The personal philosophy question: what system lives inside you?
Here's where this gets really interesting, because the capitalism versus socialism debate isn't just about national economic policy. It's about how you, personally, choose to live your life. Marcus Aurelius understood that you can't control external systems, but you can control your own philosophy, your own choices, your own response to circumstances. So the question becomes, what principles actually guide your decisions? Do you live as a capitalist, constantly calculating personal advantage, optimizing for individual success? Or do you live as a socialist, prioritizing community, sharing resources, putting collective welfare above personal gain? Most people, if they're honest, will realize they're massive hypocrites who preach one system while practicing another. Think about your actual behavior, not your political opinions. When you negotiate your salary, are you thinking about economic equality, or are you trying to get as much as possible for yourself? When you buy something, do you choose the cheapest option, pure capitalism, or do you consider the working conditions of those who made it, socialist ethics? When you invest for retirement, are you putting money in community projects, or are you seeking maximum returns in the stock market? Most people who vocally support socialism live deeply capitalist personal lives. They want market efficiency when they're consumers and socialist redistribution when they're on the receiving end. It's not hypocrisy exactly. It's just proof that both systems address real human needs that can't be satisfied by one approach alone. Nietzsche would tell you to stop looking for the right system and start creating your own values. The world doesn't divide neatly into capitalism and socialism because human needs don't divide neatly into individual versus collective. You need both personal agency and social connection. You need the freedom to pursue your own goals and the security of knowing you won't be abandoned when things go wrong. You need competition to drive excellence and cooperation to accomplish things no individual could do alone. The people who thrive aren't the ideological purists. They're the pragmatists who take what works from each system and ignore the rest. Mill argued for individual liberty as the foundation of a good society, but even he recognized that your liberty ends where it starts harming others. That's the real challenge. How do you maximize individual freedom while maintaining social cohesion? How do you reward merit without creating hereditary aristocracies? How do you provide security without destroying initiative? These aren't questions with final answers. They're tensions you have to constantly balance. The system that lives inside you should be flexible enough to recognize that different situations require different approaches. Sometimes you compete. Sometimes you cooperate. Sometimes you prioritize yourself. Sometimes you sacrifice for others. The goal isn't ideological consistency. It's wisdom. And wisdom recognizes that life is too complex for any single system to handle.
The system you choose when nobody's watching.
So here's what it comes down to. Capitalism and socialism aren't just economic systems. They're philosophies about human nature, power, and how you choose to live. Every day, in countless small decisions, you're voting for one system or the other with your actions. When you negotiate hard for yourself, you're choosing capitalism. When you help someone expecting nothing back, you're choosing socialism. Most of us live in the messy middle because that's where real life actually happens, and maybe that's the whole point. The question isn't which system wins the debate, it's which principles you're going to embody when the cameras are off and nobody's keeping score. Are you going to wait for the perfect system to save you? Or are you going to take responsibility for creating value, building relationships, and living according to your own examined values? Marcus Aurelius would tell you that external systems will always be flawed, but your internal philosophy, that's yours to control. Here's my challenge to you. For the next week, pay attention to when you're acting like a capitalist and when you're acting like a socialist. Notice the contradictions. Notice when your stated beliefs don't match your actual behavior. That gap. That's where real self-knowledge lives. And self-knowledge is more valuable than any economic system. If this video made you think differently about capitalism, socialism, or yourself, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're building a community of people who want depth over sound bites, wisdom over ideology, and honest thinking over comfortable lies. More videos like this are coming, but only if you show YouTube there's an audience for ideas that actually matter. Drop a comment telling me, which system do you think lives inside you? Let's have a real conversation about it.